Sunrise in Kenya, East Africa. An unforgettable sight. Time for those whose home is in Kenya's Rift Valley to begin another day. The Rift Valley's most famous assets are its wild animals. Many people spend thousands of dollars on safari to see sights like this. Most Rift Valley tourists make Nairobi their headquarters. It's East Africa's most modern city and a fairly short distance from the Rift Valley, just beyond the hills. We are standing here at the highest place in the beautiful Ngong Hills. On this side of the Ngong Hills, we find a dry and arid plain, the great and mysterious Rift Valley, where perhaps over 300,000 Masai people live. The most progressive city in all of Africa on one side of these hills, and on this side, some of the most primitive people. Thousands of Masai still live as did their ancestors hundreds of years ago. Their homes are huts made of mud and animal dung. After a rainfall, repairs must be made. Livestock stay in the village enclosures overnight for protection from wild animals. Cattle, sheep, and goats share huts with the Masai people. Flies are a constant irritant to the Masai. Masai women have always carried water from stagnant ponds in the hills, miles from their villages. A green scum covers the pond, but the women part the disagreeable-looking scum to get at the scarce source of water for their families and their animals. Cattle play a revered role in the Masai lifestyle. What you see here is far more than a herd of beautiful cattle. You see here the wealth and worth and dignity of one Masai man. A Masai's worth and wealth is measured by how many cattle he has. To even part with one diminishes him that much in his own eyes and the eyes of his fellows. Because cattle need water, and because Masai land is extremely arid, the Masai were nomads. In periods of drought, the Masai would drive their cattle through the Rift Valley and beyond, looking for precious water and grass. Their homeland goes months and sometimes even years without rainfall. The primitive Masai believed the sky and earth were once one. After separation of earth and sky, the Masai were given cattle as a divine gift, and they believe the earth and things associated with it are unfavorable. That explains their reluctance to plant and eat vegetables, and their regard for livestock. They were called the people of the cattle, and their diet consisted of blood, meat, and milk. However, the days of nomadic existence for the Masai are numbered. One of the few Masai elders with formal education is the Reverend Sam Poulet. He's not too young to remember, and he'll tell you the good old days were in reality not so good.
I cannot help thinking and remembering when I was a boy, born in this valley, and knowing the problems that our Masai people had. The problem of communication, lack of food, diseases, no education, and many other innumerable problems. I cannot help thinking when many children used to die. The people roaming about, looking for green pastures, looking for where they could water their animals. Now, some people think that the Masai people are happy the way they live, in small huts, which are dark. They darken their rooms because inside a dark room, there will be no flies, because flies will go where there is light. Now, why do they do that? They cannot eat food outside their kraals because they are bothered by flies.
These were the type of scenes encountered by Denny and Jean Grindle when they came to Masai land on a photographic safari in 1968. The Grindles were florists from Seattle, Washington. They returned home but could not escape thoughts of the Masai and their wretched living conditions. 2 years after their safari to Kenya, the Grindles returned for what turned into annual trips to Kenya to live and work with the Masai at the village of Olashibor.
Jean and I just felt it from the very start. You know, the thing that is so important is that they learn to do these things for themselves, to produce their own food, and that way we found out that it just gives them a real confidence. Jean and I also feel that living with them has been one of our greatest assets, because, you know, as we live with them, we learn their culture, we learn about them, we learn their good points and their bad points, and that has made us not a stranger, but has made us one of them. As Jean and I came and became acquainted with them, we found out that there were many things that they needed. For instance, no longer could they be nomads. They had to have a settled way of life. They had to live in one spot, a place much like Arizona or Eastern California, with no water, no medical facilities, a very poor house, improper food. They must settle down. That means a life that needs sanitation, needs proper housing. They have to learn to grow crops. Jean and I have experienced 3 different droughts here in this area since we came, when they lost practically all their cattle because the grass just dried up. There was no water. And during this time when they lost their cattle, there was no milk for the children, and it was just a chain reaction. They died. Of course, famine relief came in, but famine relief is not the answer. What the Masai need is to learn to use their hands, the ability that God has given them, to produce food for themselves. And we have proven right here that it can be done.
Grindle reasoned that if the Masai were to survive in permanent villages rather than living as nomads, they'd have to have a more stable water supply, not only for their own use, but to water the precious cattle. This called for building a dam, which in turn required money. Denny said he and Jean would raise $1,000 if the Masai would sell some of their cattle to get the rest of the money needed to buy materials for the project. Grindle had never built a dam, but after reading about dams and reservoirs, he felt it could be done. He had to sell the idea to the elders of the village of Olashibor, and it was not an easy sales job.
I know that much water comes through this valley. During the dry time of the year, it's dry, and then when the rains come, much water comes. You can build a dam yourself if you're willing to sell your cattle and to buy pipe and help rent equipment, we can build a dam that will give you a lake behind it. Now, are you willing to sell your cattle and to work every day to do it?
That water which passes here is a lot of water, so it's impossible to make a dam.
Alpayan, you trust me, and I'll give you water.
Not all the elders went along with the proposal, but those who did organized a cattle drive and sold enough steers to finance construction of the first small dam located in the hills above the village of Olusegun. The first small dam was built with concrete and cost only a few $1,000s. It took Denny and his Masai workmen 2 months to complete that first dam. But the reservoir was filled in one night by a torrential rain. Masai from miles around came to see that reservoir. It was only the size of a duck pond, but it was regarded as a miracle by the water-starved Masai. Grindle could not speak their language, and they couldn't speak his. The men had never before swung a hammer or sawed a board, but together they had built the dam that formed this pond. Denny's next plan involved digging trenches and laying pipe to get the water to the village. It took nearly 13,000 feet of pipe to bring water to the village, and what a day of excitement it was. A Masai had never before seen water under 50 pounds of gravity pressure. That was a happy day for one of the elders, a man named Lankaini, who gambled part of his cattle herd in an attempt to better his people's way of life.
We never washed clothes. We never even had a bath. So we used to be just dirty. We had nowhere to wash our clothes, and we were not progressive at that time. Many flies were surrounding our children. When we agreed, a few of us, to sell animals, I was one of them. And we said, we have to sell some animals and then see what Denny is going to do. Some people agreed, some didn't. We started contributing some of the animals, and then we sold them. And then we were just a few elders. When we succeeded in making the first part of the dam, the rest of the elders joined us. Well, we are very thankful, and I usually pray for Denny because of what he did to us.
Everything flowed from that small dam. What had been a temporary village began to take on an air of permanency. But more importantly, Denny gained the Masai trust. It allowed him to proceed to another area of need, housing. The traditional mud and dung houses would not withstand the seasonal rains, and they attracted flies. One observer wrote of the Masai houses, they were damp, uncomfortable, and unhealthful. A tiny hole in the wall, supplemented by a small kerosene lamp, gave the only light. Since wood and metals were too expensive, Grindle devised a ferro cement house that could be built for the equivalent of 2 steers. Again, Denny had to convince the elders that the permanent houses were worth selling their most prized possessions, their cattle. In addition, he had to gain agreement that the animals could not be kept in the houses, nor in the village, but in a fenced-off corral. Denny might have failed on the issue of housing and fencing off the precious cattle had it not been for the support of Simeon Mboya Olasakuda.
When Denny first challenged the elders to sell their animals, they couldn't sell. But I thought, and I agreed myself, and I said, whether people like it or not, I'll start as an example, show people what can be done. The reason why I agreed to build a village like this, I thought that my children should not remain in cow dung where cattle and sheep and goats are, and then there are flies. And I thought that my children should be living in a clean situation. Also, my wives have been living in a cow dung, and when they go to milk their animals, they are troubled by mud and flies. Denny came and challenged us so that we can have a model village like this one.
As in the dam construction project, the Masai did the work with Grindles' guidance. Persuading the Masai to create vegetable gardens was almost as difficult a task as was convincing them to sell some of their cattle.
They're the people that are so wrapped up in their cattle that they cannot see anything else. Not only are they wrapped up in their cattle, but their culture says they are the proud Masai. Never dirty your hands, never get in the soil, never scratch around. That is only for a person that is not stately as the Masai. But you know, these Masai, if they continue to feel that they are the proud Masai and cannot reach in the soil, they're going to starve to death, because no longer is there any place for them to graze their cattle. Coffee, tea, and tea plantations, sisal plantations have come in and taken all of their good land that allowed them to graze their cattle during the dry time of the year in the valley. And so when a drought comes along, they're finished. Their cattle die. It's a chain reaction.
Denny and Jean managed to persuade the Masai that they must work in the soil and grow vegetables to supplement their former diet of meat, milk, and blood. Their diet was contributing to their poor health. While Denny worked with them in the fields, Jean taught the women how to utilize the newly grown vegetables in their meal planning and preparation.
Oshamba, Tipaka, Porky, and Gadi. Yeah. Gima, Tipaka,
It didn't take long until Masai from other villages were coming to the small reservoir to obtain water for their cattle and for household use. Demand exceeded the supply. Eventually, 7 dams were built and 7 water reservoirs were created in a 40-mile radius of Olasheber. While the first dam was made of concrete, the rest were earth-filled structures. Although earth movers and other pieces of equipment were rented for some of the work, much of it was by Masai muscle power and Grindle ingenuity. For example, in order to transport rocks, Denny organized wheelbarrow races to take advantage of the competitive nature of the Masai. The winner of each race would receive a Masai treat, fresh baked bread. Water storage tanks were built as part of the Masai Garden Project. Windmills were constructed to pump water up to the storage tanks. Again, Denny was the working supervisor in this Masai self-help project. However, a routine task like hoisting a gearbox sometimes looked like a Laurel and Hardy comedy. Watch out for that wrench. Look out below. In spite of drop wrenches and near slips, the crew escaped unharmed, and the garden had its water supply. The wonders of modern plumbing never cease to amaze the Masai. One of the early construction projects in this village was a church, presided over by the Reverend Sam Poulet. That too was constructed by Masai labor, a labor of love. If you are like me, you are asking yourself one very important question. Who will reach the Masai that live beyond this immediate valley, the 300,000 and more out there, who have no water, inadequate housing, no schools, no churches, no faith? I believe the answer lies in the Masai who are here. Denny Grindle may have just the man to bring a better life to the rest of the Masai. George Ola Sakuda has literally grown up at Grindle's side.
We found out one thing, and that was that we were going to have to find somebody among the Masai that we could train, that we could help and show how to help their people to lift themselves out of the darkness that they found. And Jean and I prayed, Lord, just give us a man. Give us a man that we can train, that we can share whatever talent and ability you've given to us. And as we prayed for this man, a small boy started to follow me around. Wherever I went, wherever I was working on windmills or pumps or building fences, this young lad would come and say, Denny, may I hold the wrench? May I use the hammer? May I do this? And I kept right on praying, Lord, just give me a man that I can teach. As the time went on, this boy grew up. He grew into the man that I prayed for.
When I was young, I've been praying that one day I may work for the Lord and help my people too. When I grew up, I found Denny and Jean, and I asked him if I can be working with him to serve my people, and he welcomed me, and I'm very happy that my prayer was fulfilled on that day.
Denny and Jean came when it was the right time for them to come and show the Masai the way to live. And the work that is being done in this valley, even though it is a kind of model, a kind of work for the Masai people to see what the possibilities of life, of changing their way of life. It is indeed a great lesson. The type of model houses that are being built here, which can show the Masai people the kind of houses they need. Some people may think that is a bother. The Masai people should be left to live the way they were living many years before. This is now too late. They can never survive if they are left to live in that kind of situation, because movement is no longer possible. The land is becoming small, and many other things have to come to the Masai people so that they can see the possibilities of change, and so that they can also live like any other human being.
As I was thinking about why we came and if we would do it all over again, I found that my reasons were all selfish ones. There's just nothing like the thrill of helping other people. And it's a great satisfaction to both of us to have been here these past years. But I've also learned a great deal. One of the things I learned, that despite the fact that Masai and American culture are about as different as you can get, I found that when we got to know the people as individuals, that in their innermost beings, we were just exactly the same, whether we were Masai or whether we were Americans. One of the greatest treasures in life that I can think of are friendship. And because we've been here with the Masai, we have met the most exciting and interesting people that have become good friends of ours, and it's a real treasure.
The Grindles discovered that anyone can reach out beyond the hills of his or her own hometown. In a way, the Masai culture mirrors our own. The Masai are reluctant to give up their wealth, their cattle, even to improve their lives. Yet that same problem faces people everywhere, whether it's cattle or stocks and bonds, cash or material things. When Denny and Jean first saw the living conditions endured by the Masai, they were appalled. They wanted to help, but they asked themselves, what could one couple accomplish in this foreign culture? The Grindles found out they could accomplish a lot. They improved the Masai nutrition by introducing vegetables to their diet. They provided a year-round water supply for the people and their cattle. They've shown them how to build permanent homes that help to eliminate scenes like this from the old village. They've directed the construction of schools and churches, and they've helped cut down the instances of disease and death among Masai children. The Grindles introduced water in the Masai village and improved the sanitation. They truly have made an impact.
Endo soba. What you have seen are bits and pieces of one of the most incredible stories that I've ever experienced. And it makes you ask, who are Denny and Jean Grindle? Well, they're not rich. Soba. They're not formally educated in many of the things they've taught the people here. But what did they do right? They had a desire to put their faith to work in a strange culture. They came not as helpers, but they came as neighbors and friends to live in, to give, and to receive. And I think most of all, they came to have the time of their life. Teilhard de Chardin says that joy is the surest sign of the presence of God. Pequeña. Well, when you come to this village and you see Denny and Jean, who have left their beautiful home in Puget Sound area for 6 months of the year, they're having the time of their life. And this village of Olashaver is a place of joy.